PhD in Progress, Episode 2. This week we discussed the report titled Non-Academic Careers of PhD Holders. Then we interviewed Dr. Fatimah Williams Castro, the career coach behind BeyondTheTenureTrack.com. Let's go!
You're either a first year or you're really creepy. I mean, what?
Welcome back to the PhD in Progress podcast. I'm Jason.
I'm Nikhil.
And I'm Abigail, and we're here to chat about how you can best take advantage of your graduate education and put it to work for you.
The first thing we want to talk to you about today is this report called The Non-Academic Careers of STEM PhD Holders. And this was published by a group called AIR. What is that?
The American Institutes for Research, of course. And who are they? I don't know, but it supports the national effort to prepare more students for educational and career success in STEM by improving teaching and providing all students with the 21st century skills needed to thrive in the global economy.
That sounds like the goals of our podcast.
That is our podcast.
Oh.
They stole our podcast.
No,
where do they get their data? 2010 NSF survey of PhD holders. So not just current PhD students, but anyone who's gotten a PhD ever. So
Up to age 70 or 75 or something.
And then after that you die, right?
Wow.
On average.
That's offensive to our lovely senior listeners.
Our senior listeners.
Who we love. One of the main findings is that 61% of people who obtain their PhD do not end up in the tenure track or academic positions. We were trying to figure out, is this surprising?
I think the statistic itself isn't surprising, right? 60%, there aren't that many tenure track professor jobs out there. So that alone is not really surprising. But what's really interesting about this is, you can look at that statistic and you still don't know anything about why people chose maybe to leave the academy. Is it because they couldn't find a job and they really wanted to be a tenure track professor? Or is it because they really wanted to do something different with their lives? And so that's something I think we should talk a little bit more about. Yeah.
And the report does a really good job about breaking down the different types of careers that people are in, especially across between sex, male and female, and between a bunch of different racial and ethnic backgrounds. Among, sorry.
Between is only for two.
Yeah, I am terrible at English, thank you.
It does. They do break it down across the board pretty extensively, although the statistics don't seem to differ that much, and I'm not sure. It's kind of boring. I think.
It is.
This report is kind of boring, but the 60% is a number that I think some people will find surprising.
A little boring, but kind of informative. They seem to make one of the big distinctions of saying that minority and women PhD holders are less likely to be in academic positions, at least during this self-reporting, than others.
Than white dudes.
That's interesting. So do you think that's because of self-selection? Do you think that these populations have elected to leave academia of their own volition? Or do you think that there's a systemic bias against...
Can I say all? I don't know.
All.
I don't know necessarily about systemic bias. This might be the case. I'd like to think that now it's not as much of a case. At least perhaps a minority was able to get to the position where they're interviewing for jobs and at different schools. I don't think this is the case, but maybe in the past, because this is taking into account all PhD holders up until this point. So people who are 70 and still professors. And
I think, if you think about it historically, someone who's 70 now got their PhD when they were 20, so 50 years ago. 50 years ago, how many women were getting STEM PhDs? Probably one.
Yeah, how many black professors were there 50 years ago?
How many black professors were there? So I think part of that is probably the fact that this report is surveying such a broad swath of people, but probably also systemic bias and self-selecting. I vote all of the above. We'll link to this report on our website so you can read it for yourself and see what you think. and look at the breakdown.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts. So if you want to comment on it on the website or tweet at us about your opinions on the racial biases.
And are you surprised by this 60% number?
Right.
Although I think it's worth mentioning, we talked a little bit about this last week, but not on the air. The 60% who aren't in academia, half of those are still in research and development. So really it's 30% who are not doing science, let's say, and 60% who are not in the academy. And so really, when you break it down like that, if you think about pharmaceutical companies and things like that, it seems less surprising to me.
One of the obvious questions becomes, are current PhD programs preparing people to pursue these non-academic jobs? And I'm of the opinion that, yes, they probably are, because so many people are in these non-academic jobs. But at the same time, is this through overt training? Are we obviously obtaining the skills to pursue these non-academic jobs? And that probably isn't the case in most PhD programs. I know there are some pilot programs where they're trying to, talk to companies and do whatever. And our guests later on in the interviews makes a good point of this, but just briefly, our field, biology, has a really easy one-to-one match, right? If we don't want to go into academia, the obvious choice is to go into an industry job or biopharma job, right? We use the same types of skills to pursue either basic research or medical research in a hospital or a university.
Right,
or
there are options for us to continue to do bench work if we don't want to stay in academia.
And they'll pay you pretty well for that.
One would hope.
No, they do. Better than a professor, at least.
I don't know.
Anyway, I think the sort of broad point is that people have a number of different motivations for why they choose the jobs that they do. So the decision to stay in academia or to leave academia, and when you leave academia, do you pursue a research position or a non-research position? These are all things that ultimately boil down to personal preference and job, lifestyle, fit.
Right, and external factors as well, right? If you have been on the job market for several years and you haven't gotten a job, then you are probably going to look outside the academia. And there's lots of anecdotes about that. People being on the market for a long time, especially in the humanities, adjuncting forever, and not finding the tenure track job, and then saying, all right, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to define success a different way. This is a great setup for our guest for today, whose website, beyondthetenuretrack.com, helps prepare graduate students for non-academic careers.
And she actually does one-on-one career counseling and career coaching as well.
I think you forgot the most important point, Jason, which is that Fatimah was at one point a PhD, and she's not a professor at the moment. And so she herself has made this transition.
She has gone beyond the tenure track.
That's
She's
correct.
walking the walk.
She's making her own way and helping other PhDs make their own way at the same time. And I think that's kind of cool. So without further ado, let's hear a little bit more from Dr. Fatimah Williams Castro.
Today I'm here with Dr. Fatimah Williams Castro, and she's a PhD career coach with BeyondTheTenureTrack.com. So thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
Of course. I'm really excited for you to be our first guest, and I think what you do really speaks to one of the major themes of our show, which is how current PhD students and maybe people who will finish their PhD already can find what careers they're really interested in, maybe especially if they feel like leaving the tenure track that's been laid before them. So first, give us a good example and good taste of, who you are and what you've done and where you've been.
Sure. So I started Beyond the Tenure Track officially about a year ago. I've been doing some career coaching work with graduate students prior to that, but I really started to formalize it in 2013, early 2013. And so it started out as a blog, really just sharing information. I started to hear some consistent questions among graduate students who are asking similar questions. So things like, how do I tell my graduate committee or my thesis committee that I'm really not interested in going on the academic path, or I'm still interested in finishing my dissertation, but I'd like to pursue other options, or I'd like to see what else is out there. So navigating, how do I tell them? What do I say to them? All the way to questions like, how do I prepare a resume? The difference between a CV and a resume. So some questions that are more about relationships and how to navigate those, and others that are more technical about really how do I transition out now and, really position myself as a professional who can do other work besides the research and teaching. So we got started, doing that, and it's really grown. I now offer lots of different services to graduate students, and am now even working with some tenure track professors who are saying, I love this work, but I think I'm done with this work.
Oh,
and
okay.
what else is out there, and how can I leverage my skills at this point in my career? But maybe to back up a little bit, because you asked where I've been. Prior to be on the tenure track, I completed my doctorate in cultural anthropology from Rutgers University in 2011. So not too long ago. And while I was on the academic job market, I also applied for other positions that were what we would call applied positions. So work in the quote unquote real world. And I wanted to try my hand at program management and see what that was about. And so I did that. I set with the option of taking a postdoc that was offered to me or taking a career job that was offered to me. And if you've read my blog or anything like that, I took the latter option. So that's a little bit about where I've been.
Yeah, and your blog is such a great resource because it really kind of shows, different paths that people can take. You had a more recent video of just listing different fields that might be of interest to people who might be graduating now and trying to figure out which area is like a career path is somewhere they can go. And so was there something that inspired you in particular to start beyond the tenure track, or is it just kind of your own journey and you felt like helping others?
I had actually already gone through the career transition process. So I was fortunate enough to, like I said, when I was on the job market in my final year, so finishing up the DIS, I already had my, defense date set. I knew already that I just wanted to work in a different way, right? So I took the leap, and I do say leap because I think sometimes as graduate students, it's really easy to ignore that voice that's saying, I think I want to do something else, right? It's really easy to do that because all the implications of that is, wow, I might have to do this alone. What resources are available? What would I do? And all that kind of anxiety and angst that comes
And I think
along.
it's like particularly difficult for graduate students who've been in academia their whole lives, right? Since they were 5 or 6 until, almost 30 or so.
Exactly.
When they start. Everything's kind of been formalized in such a way. And then the expectations that, oh, maybe you should just go ahead and do that postdoc and become a professor or whatever the case is. Was there something in your dissertation research that kind of allowed you to acquire skills to go ahead and do this PhD career coaching?
Perhaps. So I am an anthropologist and a cultural anthropologist. So our main research methodology, or one of the main ones, is ethnography. Ethnography and then also interview. So a lot of what I do as a career coach is listening. I listen, I synthesize, I feed back to you what I hear so that I'm sure that I understand correctly what you're saying, and also to help you as a client hear what you're saying and to help you kind of push through, with other ideas. So I think in that, that sense, like the coaching is somewhat of an iterative process, much like ethnography and interviewing is. As an ethnographer, you really have to have a good skill of observation, the patience to listen, and also insights to hear outside of your own frame of reference and thinking. But I will say, a lot of why I chose not to go into the academy is because I felt like I would not have the space for my entrepreneurial spirit and kind of collaborative spirit. I really like to work collaboratively. And at least in my discipline, there's not a lot of opportunity to do that. And so my choice to take that program management position was to give me the opportunity to, one, work collaboratively, apply some of my, what I would say are some personal skills that I just have and have developed in other areas. I love public speaking. I'm not sure that, anything in grad school prepared me for that.
Yeah.
If you have been to an academic conference, you know exactly what I mean. Like we present a lot, but I'm not sure that we do so in the most effective or, fun ways. So there were skills that I'll say skills, but also just things that I do really well, that I didn't feel like were going to be captured in the academy. And, just one might say, well, you could still have gone the academic route and done other work on the side. There's plenty of examples of faculty who do that, right? Who have the tenure track position. And then they're also doing, they've got a side gig where they're doing something else. They're consulting or they're doing some other work. But when I looked out on the landscape, it tended to be faculty members who were post-tenure. And I had to make the decision, do I want to invest that much more of my life waiting to be able to really have the voice I want to have?
And was that a hard decision for you, or?
I mean, decisions are always tough, right? But I will say it made it much easier when I actually got a position. So the job that I got that was offered to me was very close to my house, so I didn't have to worry about the commute. The salary was much higher, like $20,000 higher than the postdoc I was being offered. And I already knew some of the people in the circle that I would be working in. And this work would just kind of deepen that and also kind of help me to build some skills. So yes, it is. I think the decision to do it wasn't difficult, but how to navigate once saying yes and once being in that full-time, position as a program manager in the nonprofit sector. So it brought with it a number of other questions. Would I continue to publish? Would I go back on the job market and maybe wait for a tenure track position to come along or apply for things as they would come along? And that, I think, is often probably more of the challenge than deciding whether to take the job or not take the job. It's how do I want to be in this job?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to think about there always, right? Because, and in my personal journey, just for a little information, I'm a microbiology student, so I've been in lab for, a really long time now. I'm getting ready to graduate. And I just realized I really miss doing research, but I feel like I'm not the best at it either, where maybe I'm better at supporting other people do their research, but then doing that support role, will I miss being in the lab, just running around and having those frantic experimental days and the successes and the highs and lows that come with that? So it's still the struggle. And I'm sure whichever field you're in, when you do so much schooling in it must feel definitely uncomfortable, at least, and if not just downright scary, just the prospect of not doing it anymore.
Absolutely, because you have to, I was just writing a piece on this, it'll come out pretty soon, but when you make that choice, you're basically saying that you're opening yourself to redefining yourself, really, right? Because up until now, you've been able to lead in with, I'm a PhD student, or my research is in X, I am a biologist, right? So we lead in with what we do rather than kind of the broader, like who we are. And that can be, it's a different shift. You have to kind of shift your thinking about what you bring, not just to the market in terms of job market, whatever one you're on, academic or not, but it's a shift in positioning yourself. So when you do decide to work outside of the academy, it no longer, you don't get the same traction by beginning a conversation with, so my research is in, or I have a PhD in whatever. It just doesn't resonate in the same ways. People want to know, well, what do you do with that? Or how do you use that? Or who are you beyond the biology? Or who are you beyond the anthropology, right? What do you bring? It may not be as apparent, like what your skill set or not your skill set, but what your discipline brings to them.
Yeah. So I guess going into your coaching a little more, what are the main struggles that you find with graduate students who, like you mentioned earlier, do tell their committee members or their advisors that maybe I don't want to stay in academia, or maybe they do? And I was wondering if you also coach to the PhDs who do want to stay in academia.
So most of my coaching clients are ones who they come to me already ready. Like they come to me already having said, yes, I want to make this transition. I'm just not sure how. Yes. And they usually tend to be in the final stages of dissertation writing. So, a semester out, 9 months out, which, we can talk about timing. I think there's a lot of lost ground when you wait that long and not to decide, right, but to explore. So I want to make a distinction there between exploration and keeping your options open, and what that means to do professional development throughout your career, and what it means to transition from an academic career background to a non-academic career. So those are two different things. I don't expect a second-year PhD student to decide, yeah, I don't want to be in the academy. Although there are those who start, and I've spoken with those as well, who say, I knew from the beginning I didn't want to be a professor. My father was a professor and I saw that, but I still wanted to study this topic. But there are things that I would say an early stage PhD should be doing, whether you decide to be a faculty member or whether that option hopefully is open to you or not. But there are things that you can do early stage that just help to broaden out your network, that help you to think about how you position yourself, even in the academy and outside. There's a lot of things that can be done early stage that are helpful, rather than waiting to the last, 6 months to try to build a whole new identity or a whole new career path for yourself.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think one of the most important things for an earlier stage graduate student is to do? Like what should they be doing right now?
Well, early stage, I would say it's really good to understand, and I kind of use this in my coaching, I go deeper into it, but understand the economy and the world around whatever your subject matter is. So for example, I'm a cultural anthropologist. My research was based on activism, social movements in Colombia, South America. And these social movements operated around really particular topics and issues. So for me to understand the economy and kind of the politics or the policy around that world is to say, yes, I want to understand the activism that's happening on the ground. I want to understand the actors. I want to understand what's happening here, but I also want to know who else is concerned about these issues and topics. And so kind of going that next level out, or that kind of next, kind of zooming out a little bit, would then reveal to me that, well, there are organizations like the United Nations, the World Bank, a number of foundations, international foundations or inter-American development organizations that are interested in how do we support these same communities that these activists are working in to, strengthen their capacity, citizenship, participation. So it's understanding who else is interested in what you're interested in and how do they talk about it? How do they do the work, right? So you're not the only one who's interested in this topic that you're working on. Get to know some of those people who are working on the same things, but from a different frame. That alone will broaden out your network, whether you decide to continue with your research or not.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I've recently had really good success just networking and just talking to new people, even if I wasn't necessarily excited about joining their company or whatever. I want to hear a little more about industry and like the biopharma complex a bit, especially because we don't, at least in our program, we don't get to see much of it outside of our walls, right? It's kind of hard to look past the academic careers that we see all the time. And I think it's been really vital for me to reach out to those people and even they, and I found this to be really great in general, that people want to help people.
Absolutely.
Exactly, right? So when I talk to these people, they're just excited to, have someone younger who's, exploring their opportunities or just learning more, and they want to help you by connecting you with whoever they can. So
that's important. That's really important, Jason, because I think a lot of the clients I work with, they say, what do you mean? You want me to talk to people I don't know? You want me to reach out to people I don't know? Like, well, if this is something that I'm a firm believer in. If you want something that you never have had, you've got to do something you've never done. And even, one of my former career coaches says, well, you have the option of not talking to people. But when you don't talk, you narrow down the options that you have for work and for connection. So you limit yourself to the circle that you already know if you don't reach out and talk to other people. And there's that fear factor, right? Usually my clients are afraid, well, how do I reach out to them? What do I say? Are they going to say no? Aren't they busy? Yeah, they're busy. And some people will be really silent. They won't say no, but maybe they're so busy that they don't answer the email. But others will. And that leads to, as you said, it may not lead directly to a position, but it leads to a network. And, the base of network is we're all people. And those same people that you're contacting, the job that they have right now is probably because of someone that they knew or someone they met at a conference, some connection that they made. They didn't just send a job application out into the ether, and they just got chosen. They did something, they connected in some way. And so people understand that power of connection and they want to give back.
What was that line you said? You just said something that I've never heard before, but was amazing. Like, if you want something you've never had to, you have to do something.
Yeah, if you want something you've never had, you have to do something you've never done.
That is great.
Yeah.
That is, I might make that like the tagline for this episode.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Can you tell us a little more about what we can find on beyondthetenuretrack.com?
Yeah, so Beyond the Tenure Track right now, I've been moving a bit away from blog posts into video posts. We're pretty busy. And so sometimes it's easier to watch a quick 2-minute video on your phone or on your iPad rather than read through a couple paragraphs. And so, you will find both. You'll find different tips about how to connect, how to build your network. You'll find tips about how to position yourself. And one big area I'm really moving into is career exploration. So the biggest question that I get is, if not academia, then what? It is not always very clear the then what, right? Because, perhaps, and this is a bit of a leap, but perhaps in the natural sciences, there is a bit more of a one-to-one. Like, you could be hired by Big Pharma to work on, right, to continue doing your work and even, do a lot of work behind the bench, right? Or kind of expanding on that a bit. But you could be hired right now for doing exactly what you do.
Yeah, pretty much.
Right now.
Yeah.
But, there's still some people who say, you know what, I don't want to work like this. I would like to do something a little bit different. I want to use some of these skills. Or there are clients who say, no, I'm done. It's ran its course, 7 or 8 years doing this work and doing this research. I'm ready for something else. I'll give you an example of one client that was like that. Recently, another cultural anthropologist who decided, I think her work was in Spain and on immigration, and later looking at those same communities in New York. At the heart of it, though, she has about 2 or 3 areas that she's really interested in. One is journalism, and the other one, I think, was user experience. Very different areas, but ones that, as a cultural anthropologist, she does have skills that could be translated into either of those. But with both of them, it will still require some level of work to demonstrate that she has the capacity to do those things. Basically, I want people to understand that you don't have to do and you probably won't find a job in exactly what you were trained to do. So that means we've got to think broadly about your skill set, and we also have to get some strategies for career exploration. So when you go to beyondthetenuretrack.com, like that's what you're going to find are more tips around how do I know what comes next.
Yeah, and that's particularly hard for people who've been doing their research for 5 or 6 years, and that's what they've done, right? And
right.
Like I know for people in my field, we're encouraged to do a similar topic where I do developmental biology. So it's kind of how a fertilized egg becomes essentially an adult animal and all the genes and processes that are involved in that. And for us, like our big switch, if we want to be a postdoc, is that we take that basic understanding of that field in general, and then we move it to a different organism and study a slightly different organ that's being patterned or whatever.
Yeah, no, that doesn't count.
And it doesn't count, exactly, right?
That doesn't count. I would tell you, and Beyond the Tenure Track, that doesn't count. Because what if you, and I don't know this about you particularly, but what if, you as a developmental biologist said, what I most want to do is collaborate in a different way? Or what if you decide that there are features that you want in your career that are not captured by just moving from one organism to the next, right? Mm-hmm. So it's important that your career paths really be guided by how do I like to work and how do I want to work? So there may be things that you're doing right now that you really enjoy, but then there's things that you really want to do that aren't captured there. And so the work of a career coach and helping you through that exploration point is helping you to find really the match, right? It's almost like matchmaking. It's like finding the career path that really helps you to bridge those things that you want to do and those things you know how to do. Right, it's that perfect overlap of what you want to do and what you know how to do, and knowing too that there will be some skill building that's necessary, but that's okay. That's okay because you have a base from which to work from. But it's what do you want to do and how do you want to be working?
Yeah, and those are often very difficult to find out, and it's not just sit down with a coffee for a minute or two and figure out exactly what you want. It's something you have to explore a bit, and this is where the networking helps a bit, and talking to people like career coaches, obviously, and looking online at different blogs and
absolutely
for careers and going to conferences, stuff like that.
You're stealing my thunder, Jason. That's exactly it. That's exactly it, though. It is getting out beyond the walls of your lab, getting out beyond the walls of your department, getting out beyond the walls of your current network, right? That's where the ideas come from. I think as researchers tend to be really introspective people. And so we often feel like we should know the answer already, but you don't. I mean, you just don't have to know. You don't need to know. It's already out there, like you said, in blogs, and conferences and other areas. So my work usually tends to push my clients out into the world, push those introspectives and those often introverts out into the world, and to do so purposefully and with authority. You are worthy of going out and finding this information, and not just worthy, but you have a lot to offer. And so I often have to tell my clients, you position yourself as a professional, not as a student. Mm-hmm. Position yourself with authority, not as, the whipping boy that your lab, the director of your lab would probably position you as.
And now that you mentioned that, actually, and we'll probably have an episode on this a little, in a few weeks or maybe a couple months, but do you find imposter syndrome has a role in people's, lack of maybe faith of their abilities to go out there and portray themselves as someone who's, worthy of hiring and even very super classified or qualified rather?
Yeah. I mean, so this is the thing with education, right? The more you learn, the more you recognize like what you don't know. Right. Yeah. So it's like you realize, even you actually said something earlier, I'm a researcher. I'm just not sure I'm that great at it. Trust me, you're great at it. Like you would not still be in your program if you weren't great at it. You wouldn't still be running experiments if you weren't great at it. You would not have the ear of your committee members if you weren't great at it. So it's also about understanding like what expertise means. expertise for us as PhDs is a whole other level of work than what expertise out there in the quote unquote real world looks like. And so what I tend to say is you have to really capture and kind of inventory what you know and what you know how to do. So not just what you know in terms of knowledge, but what you know how to do and the insights and knowledge that you have gained. You really do already have expertise. And you know what? There are things that you will do that you don't have expertise in, but you still have the right to move in the world with authority and with power. Like, no one wants to be around weak people. No one wants to, even at a conference, you'll see it. And I even challenge you to test this out when you go to a conference next. It is the people who are the ones with the firm handshake, who don't mind interrupting a conversation to introduce themselves to the person that they want to meet, who grabs the attention of the people in the room.
But that's scary.
It is scary, but you know what? At the end, you've made contact with that executive at Merck, or you've made contact with the leader of the lab who's in the director of the lab who's at the place you really want to be at. Because more likely than not, they probably were bored talking to the person who was like chattering on and on with them. And wow, another person to talk to who's coming with a sense of ownership and a sense of self. And, it's also knowing how to finesse that situation, when to enter, when to interrupt, and when to leave, right? And so those are even some things that I practice with my clients. It's not about being pushy necessarily, but it is about walking with a sense of authority and walking with a sense of purpose and knowing who you are.
Great. Well, I think you gave us so much great advice that I don't want to steal too much of it. So maybe we can talk a little bit about how people can reach you and maybe if they want to talk to you about your consulting and career services.
Sure. So, one way to reach me is at beyondthetenuretrack.com. And you can also email me, Fatimah, PhD, FATIMAH, PhD, @gmail.com. Send me a quick note. Let me know what you're interested in, what stage you're at, what you want to do, what your questions are. And I'll respond to you and let you know how we can get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Fatimah. It's been great.
Thank you.
We learned a ton.
Awesome. It was a pleasure to do it. And I look forward to meeting more people who are going to be on PhD in progress.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'd be a horrible person if I didn't tell you that Fatimah will be participating in a conference called Beyond the Professoriate, a virtual conference for PhDs in transition. So this is a 2-day conference taking place on May 3rd, 2014 and May 10th, 2014, throughout the whole day, and it's being live streamed over gotowebinar.com. Fatimah will be kicking off the second day, which focuses on professional development. Her talk is called Career Exploration Strategies to Jumpstart Your Career Transition. So if you'd like more information, go to fromphd2life.com/conference. Next week, we'll be continuing our career search discussion as Nikhil, Abigail, and me decide what's working, what's not working in our own lives. If you haven't really started your career search now, we kind of suggest this. Get a pen and paper or your favorite writing program or whatever works, and write down the 3 things that you want out of your new job, the job you're looking for. Are you looking to have people you can talk to well and communicate with? Are you looking to maybe work at home a little more or work at the office more? What are you looking for? So write those down. We're going to do the same thing and discuss them next week. If you'd like, you can send in that list to feedback@phdinprogress.com. And if you give us permission, we'll talk about it too. Thank you so much for joining us this episode. And remember,
if you want something that you'd never have had, you've got to do something you've never done.
We'd love to hear what you think. Stop by phdinprogress.com to leave a message or email us at feedback@phdinprogress.com. Also, you can follow us on Twitter @PhD Podcast. Thanks for listening.